Thank you for joining us today. We're in a sermon series entitled Remember that's taking a look at some of the last things that Moses taught the Israelites. He knew he was going to die soon, and so he wanted to set in place some elements of faith that would help the people remember what was most important in their lives, particularly as they were getting ready to go into the Promised Land and to be able to take possession of what God had promised them. And so as we've been getting into the sermon series, the first sermon was entitled What It's All About. And it helped us look at the laws that God had given through Moses to the Israelites and that we now look at as the Bible. But it helps us to realize that the Bible, the laws, the rules, the commands, all of the things that God has given us are more than just rules. That all of the Bible, when you look at it, is intended to point us back toward God. In fact, that is so important that when Jesus was asked about, what's the greatest command, he summed up the message of the whole Bible by saying, you need to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is the most important commandment. And so we can look at the whole message of the Bible and see that that's what it's truly all about. Now, the second message was that it's important. That was the title. And the idea behind that is that following the things God has taught us is very important. In fact, it's so important that when we looked at the things Moses was teaching the Israelites, he called it a choice between life and death. And we need to remember that God has communicated to us the things that he wants us to know. And what we decide about that, what we decide about following and obeying his rules, his guidance, his laws, is extremely important. But the good thing is God has made those things so clear that the basics can be understood by anyone. So we were left without an excuse to say, well, I couldn't understand it. God has communicated what he wants very clearly, and it's important what we do with that. And now today's message is entitled Keep It Going, because we want to follow the idea that it needs to not just come to us and be rules and things that we learn, but that we keep it going, that we keep our faith growing, and that we pass it on to others behind us. And so we're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 7 through 13. And we want to look at that very idea that covers the fact that it is so important for us to know what the Bible teaches, to live by it, to keep our own personal faith going, but to pass it on to the people that come behind us. And that's very much what Moses did. He set up some things. He actually gave the Israelites some tools to use that would help them continue carrying on their faith beyond that generation. And so to do that, as we look at the idea today from Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 7 through 13, we're going to use three characteristics, three ideas that will help us to keep developing our own faith and pass it on to others. And those three things are attitude, attention, and action. So attitude, attention, and action. Well, let's take a look now at Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 7 through 13, as we follow this idea of keeping our faith going in our lives and passing it on to others so that they can learn it and live by it as well. Moses then summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, "Be strong and courageous, for you will go with this people into the land the Lord swore to give to their ancestors. You will enable them to take possession of it. The Lord is the one who will go before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or abandon you. Do not be afraid or discouraged." Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carry the ark of the Lord's covenant, and to all the elders of Israel. Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time in the year of debt cancellation, during the festival of shelters, when all Israel assembles in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he chooses, you're to read this law aloud before all Israel. Gather the people, men, women, dependents, and the resident aliens within your city gates, so that they may listen and learn to fear the Lord your God, and be careful to follow all the words of this law. Then their children, who do not know the law will listen and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. So let's take a look first of all at the idea of attitude. And that really is what Moses was trying to pass on to Joshua. And as we look at the setting again, we need to look first of all at the fact that Moses was transferring leadership to Joshua. So there's a gathering of all the people, and they are still there on the east side of the Jordan River before they go in to begin the battles, the conquest to take the promised land. But Moses is finishing up his time as the leader, and God has used him in some tremendous ways, has been leading the people now through the wilderness for 40 years. But Moses, because of his disobedience, will not be able to go into the promised land itself. But Moses is transferring the leadership over to Joshua and helping the people understand that Joshua is going to be the one to lead them in the battles that will be the conquest to take the promised land. But it's interesting to look at what Moses is trying to do with Joshua, because if you look at that passage and look back at what Moses was telling Joshua, the focus was on helping Joshua to be strong, to have courage, to do what he needed to do. And it's just fascinating to me that the focus is on what God had promised, and that Moses is reminding Joshua, these are all the things that God has done for us. He's brought us to this point, but God has promised to give us this land. And so you, knowing God and knowing that God has given his promise and knowing that God never fails in a promise, you need to lead the people in doing that. And so we see in this transfer of leadership that the focus is that God had promised, and that it now was time for the people. The people needed to follow. They needed to respond. They needed to obey what God was leading them to do in order to take the promised land. And as we look at what Moses is focusing on in telling Joshua, we see the attitude that Moses was trying to build in Joshua. You know, Joshua is basically the commander-in-chief. He is the general that's going to lead these troops into battle very soon from this point. It's just a matter of weeks now before Moses dies and they cross over the Jordan River and go take Jericho. So the time's getting very close. And it is just a fascinating thing to me that the focus is not on military strategy. The great strategy for the military troops and for Joshua being the leader all centers on faith. Faith was the key to Joshua's success. Take a look again in verse 8 to see what I mean by that. The Lord is the one who will go before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or abandon you. Do not be afraid or discouraged. And so here is Joshua, this military leader that's about to lead all of his troops into battle. And the focus is on what he knows and believes in his heart about God. And really, it needs to be that way because it's not going to be a matter of Israel's military strength. It's going to be a matter of the will of God being accomplished and of the Israelites being obedient to what God's calling them to do. And so obviously, if Joshua is the leader, Joshua really needs to be right with God, walking with God, in tune with God, in order for him to draw the strength and the courage that he needs to be the leader guiding them into battle. And so what Moses tells Joshua about that is putting all the focus back on God one more time. The focus doesn't need to be on Joshua, doesn't need to be on his troops. It needs to go back to God because Moses reassured Joshua God was going before him into battle. Now, that is a critical idea because when you begin to realize what the other nations believed, this goes completely against what the other nations around Israel believed. And I bring that up because Israel tended to take on the beliefs of the other nations around them. But at that time in that ancient world, the nations by and large believed in their gods as local gods or as national gods. So they would think, well, this is the geographical boundary of our nation, and our God is the God that is the God of this area. but he's not going beyond that. And so for Israel to be believing in their God as somewhere else already doesn't match with what the rest of the world is believing, but it is key to understanding who God is, because God does exist everywhere, but we also need to look within the will of God, that God was calling Israel to this land. And so God was obviously going before them. It was his will for them to follow him. And so when they cross the river and get in there and they begin to do the battles to take the land, God has already been there beginning to do his work, and that would be encouraging and strengthening to Joshua. But not only that, but if you noticed in what Moses told Joshua, that God would continue to be with him. In fact, he said, God will be with you. He won't abandon you. He won't leave you. He will be there with you. So God would remain with him during battle. And that is what would give Joshua the strength and the courage he would need to be the leader. He would need to use some good military strategy, but that was not the most important part. The most important part was having a genuine faith and trust in God, walking with God, learning from the law that had been written down and passed on, and using that to build his strength, his wisdom, his understanding of doing what God called him to do. If he would do that, they would be successful in taking the land. And we see that is exactly what happened. Now, let's think in the bigger picture of what that means for us. Because for Joshua, Moses was trying to build an attitude of just absolute basic trust in God and in God's Word. And so Moses had said, I've written down the law and I'm passing it on to you, Joshua, and to the people so that you will know how to obey God. So Joshua had to be completely trustworthy, trusting of that, and giving his life, his commitment, his devotion to God in the process. That is the attitude that we need to have, that when we take the Bible and we read it, we see that it is much more than just religious words, rules of do's and don'ts and things like that, but that it all points us back toward God, and that it depends on my personal faith and trust in God. But the Bible helps me to do that. And that's what it is meant to be. And that if I'm going to pass on my faith, or even if I'm going to continue growing and living in my faith, it's got to be real and it's got to be focused on God. I cannot simply approach God's Word, the Bible, as an intellectual pursuit of things to learn. It is leading me to God. That's the right attitude. And what I want to help us to understand is a very important principle as we think about this whole idea of keeping our faith going, keeping it going in my life, handing it down to others like my family, or as the pastor of the church, handing it down to people in the church and helping them hand it down to their families and to others. We can't pass on faith that is not real to us personally. You can pass on religion, but you can't pass on genuine faith unless it is something that is real and genuine in your own life. And that comes from God's Word, because God's Word is meant to guide us back toward Him. So we need, in all of this, first and foremost, to simply trust God. But trusting in God means that I trust His Word also, because I begin to recognize I have the attitude, God's Word is true. It is right. There is nothing wrong in it. It will never mislead me. I may misunderstand it, but that's my shortcoming. But God's Word has everything we need for life, and that will help us to be successful, just as Joshua and Moses found that following God helped them be successful in all that they did. So let's move on to the next point, to the idea of attention. We looked at attitude, to have that right attitude, focusing on the relationship with God and letting the Bible lead us back to Him and completely trusting the Bible to be God's Word. But let's look now at attention. and see that Moses was trying to get the leaders of the nation to give their full attention to God's law, to those things that he had written down, that he had received from God. So let's take a look at verse 9 as we get into the idea of attention, giving our full attention, our full devotion, full commitment to God's word. Verse 9. Moses wrote down this law and gave it to the priests, the sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the Lord's covenant, and to all the elders of Israel. And so we see again in this gathering of the people, Moses first of all spoke with Joshua, and he had things that he needed to pass on to Joshua and to encourage Joshua with. But now his focus is shifting to a little bit bigger audience. He is looking to the priests and to the elders, the ones that would be the different hierarchy of leaders throughout the whole nation. But the thing is that Moses here is pointing them back toward the law that God had given him, and that Moses wanted these leaders to give their full attention, full devotion, honestly and genuinely in faith with that right attitude, so that they could live by it and pass it on to others. And so we're seeing a sequence happen here. That Moses, as we know from the story earlier that we haven't actually studied in the sermon series, but goes back to the time of the wilderness wanderings after the people had come up out of Egypt, that God led them to Mount Sinai. Moses went up on the mountain and God gave him the 10 Commandments. And God continued to give Moses other direction for other laws that would be dietary laws, that would be moral laws, that would be all the basic things of how they needed to worship God, how they needed to serve him. And remember, all of it again was meant to point back toward God, to help people know God better and obey him better. So Moses received the law from God. And then Moses taught the priests and the elders. So he passed it on. He took what God had given him through a miraculous revelation. And then Moses taught that to the priests and the elders so that they, in turn, taught the people. So that's a really successful and important way to look at it, that it would be successful if the leaders were passing it on truthfully and honestly, but again with the right attitude, not just simply passing on the rules and regulations, looking at it as just law. These are things we've got to do, but looking at it as a matter of, this is how we please God. That is the attitude that they needed to give their full attention to, that they needed to be absolutely devoted to. And the point is that faith was meant to be the center of all society for the Israelites. And we see that even here in what Moses is telling the people, that it says that he gathered the priests, the Levites, who carried the Ark of the Covenant, as well as the elders. But that idea of including the Ark of the Covenant of God's testimony is reminding us that at the center of everything that was happening was their worship of God, because the Ark symbolized the very presence of God with his people. That is where God met them. But in a greater way, we understand, even though God does exist everywhere, that symbolized God being a personal God, meeting directly with his people. And so as we look at all of this, of Moses telling Joshua, you need to be committed to God and following his law, but now priests and elders, everyone that's a leader in the country, you need to take this law that God has given me, that I'm giving you. You need to learn it. You need to follow it. You need to guide the entire nation to be a people of this law. Basically, people of the word, people that were following it, because that was truly meant to be the very center of all of their society. And that was what would keep them successful, that would help them have the conquest happening, and that they would be able to take the land and live there, be productive, be secure, be safe, all of that, if they would have that attitude, giving God's full attention and living truly by it for pleasing God and obeying God. Now, let's apply that to us today and think what it is that we need to take from that will help us in our lives, in our day and age. And as I think about that, it just reminds me again that the leaders in the church need to be absolutely committed to God's word. In fact, I can say it another way. Don't trust any leader who doesn't revere God's Word. See, God's Word, again, isn't just a book to learn the do's and the don'ts, to learn religion from. It points us to a relationship with God. And it should be the very center of everything that we're all about. Just like with Israel, it was meant to be the center of their entire society. We need to be given our full devotion to God. Like Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That doesn't leave anything out. We are to love God with all that we are, and that is the message of the Bible. And that is the message that the leaders God has raised up should be preaching and teaching all the time. And the thing is that when we look at the spiritual leaders have a high responsibility. When I come and I prepare a sermon or I prepare some teaching, I need to be reminded as I do that God is holding me as a teacher of the Bible. He's holding me to a higher standard of judgment because God's Word is important. It is truly His Word, and it is the only absolute truth we have in this world. Everything else around us can change and often does change. Ideas and concepts change from generation to generation. Things that we have put our trust in years ago, we find out now are not true any longer because we have learned more science or learned more technology. But God's truth will not change. And when we teach it, when we preach it, when we pass it on, we need to be careful, any of us who do that what we're doing is faithful to what that Word is teaching. And first and foremost, that attitude should be in my heart and anyone else who's teaching's heart, that I am helping people learn the truth of God to draw them closer to Him. And the idea behind all of that is that we need to be hearing from God. We need God's truth, not man's opinion. You don't need to be hearing what Martin has thought up or what anyone else has thought up. You need to hear the absolute truth of God. And that is what we should give our full attention to and be working at finding a way of keeping that going in me and in others. And so let's talk about that part now. Let's move on to the third thing today, action. How do we put into action some ways to keep our faith growing and to pass it on to others, to keep it going beyond into the next generations and beyond that? Well, let's take a look in verses 10, 11, 12, and 13 and see some tools that Moses set in place to help the Israelites do just that, to take action to do some things that would help them grow and continue growing in faith. Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time in the year of debt cancellation, during the festival of shelters, when all Israel assembles in the presence of the Lord your God at the place He chooses, you're to read this law aloud before all Israel. Gather the people, men, women, dependents, and the resident aliens within your city gates, so that they may listen and learn to fear the Lord your God, and be careful to follow all the words of this law. Then their children who do not know the law will listen and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. And so we're seeing Moses setting in place some things, practical things, that would help the Israelites actually pass on the faith that they were intended to pass on, and not just simply pass on rules, or not just maybe give it what we call lip service of saying, yeah, we follow God, we trust in God, but not really doing it. Moses knew the people needed some things, active things, practical things set in place that would help them to do that. And so, since Moses knew the importance of the law, knew the importance of God's word that God had given him, that he had passed on to the people, he knew the people needed to hear that word. And so the law was to be read every 7 years at what we know as the sabbatical year. Now, sabbatical year is based on the same idea of the Sabbath. And the Sabbath, of course, goes back to creation itself. God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day God rested and called it the Sabbath. And the Jews were to treat that day every week as very special, very holy, set apart for God. And so they were to rest on the Sabbath, which is what we think of as Saturday. But that idea of the Sabbath rest was to be built in even beyond that, so that every 7 years there would be a sabbatical year, and that there would be a literal rest for the entire land, so that they would not plant and harvest crops. Well, at least not plant. They would harvest whatever came up on its own, whatever was left over from last year. But there would be no farming in the sabbatical year. And debts would be canceled, and any of the Hebrew slaves would be set free. It was a time of genuine celebration. But during that time, when people were more at ease and they weren't focused on getting out and working their fields, and at this one particular festival, the Festival of Shelters, the law was to be read. But one of the things that was interesting about this is that everyone was to attend the Festival of Shelters. Generally, just the men would go. 3 times a year, there were Jewish festivals that the men would need to travel to the location of the tabernacle and celebrate those 3 festivals. But on this particular one, the sabbatical year, Moses instructed the people, make sure everyone goes, not only the husband, not only the father, but we want the man, we want the women, we want the children. We even want the resident aliens, the foreigners living in the land, to go to this celebration, the Festival of Shelters, and hear the law read, because the law would be read publicly every 7 years during the Festival of Shelters. Now let's think about that for a minute. The Festival of Shelters could be also translated as Festival of Tents or Festival of Booths, because it help the people remember when God brought the people up out of Egypt. They didn't have anywhere to live. They were wandering people in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years. And so they lived in these booths or these shelters, like a tent basically. It was a temporary home before they got to the permanent home that they were now looking at across the river into the promised land. But until they got to that point, they lived in these temporary homes, the shelters or the tents, the booths. And so the Festival of Shelters helped them to remember God did an amazing, a miraculous work. He provided for them. He saved them by bringing them up out of the slavery of Egypt to bring them to the promised land. And so it celebrated God providing that for them. So a time for them to just really enjoy. It was also the time of the harvest. And so with all of these good things happening, the Festival of Shelters would be a big celebration. And now everyone was to be there so that the whole focus could be on the reading of the law. Now, I think it's likely that when Moses said, read the law every 7 years at the Festival of Shelters with everyone there, I think he probably meant the book of Deuteronomy, or what we call the book of Deuteronomy. It's possible he may have meant more than that, but let's say if he only meant the book of Deuteronomy, what I can tell, as I just did a quick search, it looks like a straight reading of the book of Deuteronomy averages around 2.5 hours. And so, imagine that, what it would be like with your entire family, the elderly, the middle-aged, the young parents, kids, teenagers, all the way down to infants. Everyone there gathered, and for 2.5 hours, hearing someone read from the book of Deuteronomy. And I think in our day and age, we find that really hard to accept as, wow, can you imagine that boring person up there just reading and reading and reading? But the thing is, we need to remember it was a different culture. They learned more along lines of that type of thing, but we need to go back to the attitude, because Moses was trying to help them to understand the law wasn't just rules and regulations. It was something that was critical to their life. It would be the choice between life and death. You need to follow God's law. If you want to find everything God has for you, it has to come back from the law. So their attitude needed to be one that valued God's law, that valued God's word, and saw that we need to take time every 7 years, as well as time in between. I mean, in between there would be many times for God's law to be read. But on the sabbatical year, during that festival, when everyone was present, all of the law needed to be read to remind the people the importance of it and to keep it going. But let's think about what was being set in place. It wasn't, again, just to help people, by rote memory, learn the law and pass it on. The purpose was to pass on faith. Look at verse 13, because verse 13 really is, to me, the focal verse of this passage to help us get that whole idea of passing on our faith, of keeping it going. Here it is, verse 13. Then their children who do not know the law will listen and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess. So look at that. Look at it again. Then their children who do not know the law will listen and learn to fear the Lord your God. That's the point. The children that are coming that didn't get to see the miracles of God, that didn't wander in the wilderness, and even beyond that, the ones that would be farther down the road beyond the conquest, that didn't see God's miraculous deliverance there, that those children who did not get to experience directly would, through the law, come to hear about God, hear about God's leading, God's guidance, God's power, God's glory, God's goodness, and they, by that, would learn to love God. And that's what it means to fear God. Not to be afraid that God's going to do something to you, but to have a reverence and awe, to recognize God is the great, all-powerful Creator God, and He is a loving and personal God. And so Moses, in saying the law needs to be read every 7 years, and you need to be passing it on faithfully with the right attitude, giving it your full attention, you need to be doing that so that these future children will be able to come to know God as well. And future generations would only know if they were told. If the parents and the grandparents and others did not pass it on, if the leaders were not faithful in taking the law and learning it and teaching it and passing it on, future generations would not have it. And if you remember, we talked about the whole fabric of their society was built on faith in God. That the very center of everything they were about came out of God's Word, out of the law. And the point is that the future of the nation rested on God's law. And the leaders needed to keep faithfully passing that truth on generation by generation by generation for the nation to be successful. And the thing is, they needed to pass on truth, not religious rules. They needed to help people understand all of these things written down by Moses, passed on to us, do help us in our lives, but ultimately it helps us in our lives because it helps us know the God who created us, the God who chose our nation, and the God who gave us this very land we are in. That's what Moses wanted the Israelites to do and to remember the importance of God's law. Now, let's think about that again for ourselves. Let's apply it to today and see what we can learn from it. How do we live out the truths we learned from Moses, teaching the leaders of the nation to pass on God's word, pass on God's truth? Well, I want us to understand that quality of life depends on following God's truth. Just like Israel's future depended on them walking with God, knowing God, obeying God, it's going to be the same for us. Now, we don't get the promises of the land and things like that Israel did. And we don't have the same restrictions for diet and other things. We don't have to worship in the same way as the ancient Israelites. But the quality of our lives depends on how much we devote ourselves to God and His truth. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. I am not saying put your faith in God, trust in God, and you're going to have all the money you want, and that your health is going to be good all the time, and that your life is going to be free of problems. That is not true. The Bible does not teach that, no matter how many Christians today believe that to be biblical truth. It is not. What I mean by quality of life is that when we walk with God, when we take the Bible and learn what it teaches, and we let that be our guide for life, that teaches us about God, that teaches us about fellow man, that teaches us about our world, when we do that, we will be able to be at peace with God no matter what kind of crisis is happening in our life. We will have the strength to face that crisis, to face that hard time, and to know God is in control. Our God is the almighty, all-powerful, all-seeing, all-knowing, loving God. And if I am trusting Him, anything bad that happens in my life, I know God can either make it right, or ultimately He will take me home to be with Him. And that'll certainly make it right, because when we get to heaven, God is going to wipe away all of the suffering, all of the pain, all of the problems we've ever dealt with. It's going to fade away into insignificance, and we will be able to have a perfect life with Him. But even now, even in this lifetime, before that happens, our knowledge and application of God's truth that helps us walk with Him in genuine faith means we will have meaning and purpose, true quality of life even now. But what can we do to pass on the importance of the Bible? I mean, the teachings of God's Word are vital to finding that quality of life. So what can we do to pass on the importance, to get others, to motivate them to have that attitude that all of the teachings of the Bible point us back toward God, and it's important that we follow them? How do we get people to give that their full attention and to take action to keep growing in it and to be devoted to that and passing it on to others? Well, first of all, let me encourage you. Again, it's just a really basic thing, which is what all of this sermon series is doing, really. All we're doing is going back to foundational basics. We just need to do that frequently in our lives. But first of all, this very basic thing, spend time reading and studying the Bible. You cannot pass on to anyone else what you don't have for yourself. If you haven't studied the Bible, if you haven't spent time reading the Bible, you won't be much help to others. You can pay it lip service. You can say some good things, and you can give some good, encouraging ideas, but that's not the same as speaking from faith that is deep in the heart, that is coming out of the mind, that's changing everything about who we are, because it is helping us connect to God. So let me encourage you. Spend time with your Bible. Read it. Study it. And then model the knowledge and trust you have in the Bible for others. I mean, you need to pass it on. And particularly in families, parents, we need to pass on to our kids genuine faith. And part of that genuine faith is a love and a respect and trust in God's Word, the Bible. It is the only infallible, true guide we have for this life. It teaches everything we need to know, one way or another. Maybe not easy to dig out all of those little nuggets of truth, but it is there. And God gives it to us. And remember, again, the basics, the foundational things, absolutely clear. God makes it where anyone can understand those basics. But we need to model that I have spent time with my Bible and that I am using it in my life to serve God better. And then finally, let me encourage you to get involved in church discipleship ministries. In Calvary, I realize we need to grow in that, but let me encourage everyone to get involved in our Sunday school programs, to get involved in our home group programs. We will start some more discipleship groups, maybe have some special focus studies. We will have some one-on-one or maybe just 2 or 3 people in very small personal discipleship. Lots of options, lots of things that we need to be doing and can be doing, but the idea is We are a church body. We are a family. We need to be growing together. And I will do my best as the leader God has put here in Calvary International Baptist Church to lead you and to give good, solid Bible teaching and preaching the best I can do. I know I'm limited. I'm not the best there is, but I do love God's Word. I do trust it, and I am trying to pass that on to you and to others. So let's have that attitude that we will do our best to grow in it, to be committed in it, to let our faith be something that's important in our lives and that we are trying to pass on to others and keep it going in our own lives. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much today for giving us these things that we can learn from Moses that he passed on to the Israelites. And Father, help us to understand that we do need to spend time in your word, but not to just simply learn about facts, but to learn about you and to learn to serve you better. But Father, help us from the encouragement we've heard today to learn to pass it on, to keep it going in our own lives, and to set some things in place that will help us teach others and help them keep passing it on as well. So thank you, and may we serve you faithfully as well as we can, according to the strength and the power that you give us. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much for being with me today, and let me encourage you to go to our Facebook page and to our church website that has the information for giving your tithes and your offerings. We appreciate all that you give, but I do challenge you to pray about what God would have you to give that will help us continue to do the ministries God has called us to do. Thank you for being with us today, and God bless you.